What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We've done it. We've covered all of the Alien films, we've covered all of the Predator films, and it's now finally time to bring these two iconic monsters together to talk about this one and its not so great sequel. But we'll start here with Alien vs. Predator. Let's take a trip back to 2004 for a film written and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, and it's a film that stars Sanaa Lathan, Lance Henriksen, Raoul Bova, Colin Salmon, and many more. Man, I have so many fond memories of when this movie was coming out. The hype was real. I remember the marketing. I remember everybody was so excited because two of the most iconic movie monsters of all time were finally going to be going toe to toe. And the only real thing that we had in any of these movies that had at all ever linked up to the idea that this would ever happen was at the end of Predator 2, where we get to see amidst all of their other trophies, all of the other skulls that they have, that the Xenomorph is one of them. And for a lot of time, that was essentially just an Easter egg for fans. And it took literally so long, many years, until we finally got to see the two titans go head to head. And I just remember this being such an exciting time. I remember as a kid, I thought this was the coolest thing in the world. And as I got older, I recognized that the film is not perfect by any means, but it's a film that ultimately is about fun. And so being able to have just revisited all of these movies and get to see these two go head to head in this movie was a blast to go back and revisit. And the director and writer of this film, Paul W.S. Anderson, is somebody who I've enjoyed some of his films on a cheesy level and have flat out not enjoyed other ones of his films. He's a director that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, but there are certain films of his that hold a very special place in my heart. And without a doubt, Alien vs. Predator is one of those films. I can't say the same about the sequel, and we'll get into that on another date, but today we're going to be talking about Alien vs. Predator. As I mentioned, this film came out in 2004, and immediately something to mention about both this one and its sequel are that they're not necessarily considered to be canon. You can have them be canon in your mind if you want them to, but there are certain things in these films that oftentimes make you scratch your head in terms of the overall timeline on whether or not this can actually fit into canon. And I think in particular, Ridley Scott coming back to do Prometheus and Alien Covenant and showing the beginning of the Xenomorphs and all of that essentially kind of eradicated these films from having a place in current canon. They are, I guess, canon in your mind if you want them to be, but they don't necessarily fully fit into the overall mythology between the Aliens and the Predator films, specifically the Alien films. So I just figured I have to mention that here because I know a lot of people wonder if these films are worth watching, are they canon, or are they just fun fan service? And I would say that they're probably more fun fan service, though there are those connective elements to the other films. You can definitely tell they were trying, but I don't think long-term continuity was something that was really being thought about when this film was coming out. The base premise of this film is that the Weyland company has now detected some sort of heat signature that's coming from some sort of temple, but it turns out this temple is underground, and so they end up getting together a group of archaeologists and scientists to go there to try to be the first to discover this temple and see what it's all about so that it can be one of the biggest discoveries in the company's history. Now, the one putting this all together, who's going himself, even though he is sick, is Charles Weyland, who many assume is the father of Peter Weyland, who was played by Guy Pearce in the Prometheus films, though again, timeline-wise, not sure it all makes 110% sense. But yeah, you have Charles Weyland in this film actually being played by Lance Henriksen, and if you look at the way that this film is credited, he's actually credited as Charles Bishop Weyland. Of course, he would actually play the character of Bishop in the second film, and even returned as a different character in the third film, Alien 3. So yeah, he's had a lot of history with the Alien franchise, Lance Henriksen, and it's great to see him in this movie as well, even though it doesn't necessarily fit into the rest of the continuity super cleanly. But yeah, you have Lance Henriksen in this film as Charles Weyland, and he shouldn't be there. He's sick, he's dying, his doctor suggests that he should not be on this expedition, but he's hoping that if they go down there and that he is there for it, that it can be one of the biggest discoveries in their company's history. Now, the main character that we focus on here is the character of Alexa Woods, played by Sanaa Lathan. I believe that's how you pronounce her name. I'm not entirely sure. She is being essentially brought into this for the most part because she's big on expeditions and archaeology, and she knows how to get in and out of dangerous situations. And so she's kind of tasked to take this group of archaeologists and scientists in and out of this temple safely. Of course, she's the one that wants to follow all the rules, but she quickly learns that with all the mercenaries involved and all the different individuals who are there for the money that's behind this expedition, she isn't necessarily calling the shots, even though she wants to try to make sure that everybody remains safe. And of course, as this is all going down, we end up learning that this temple that was down there is actually owned by the Predators. I'm going to be jumping around as I typically do with these videos. I won't be going on full chronological order here, but we learn later on in the film that this temple was actually owned by the Predators, and they used this place as a sacrificial chamber for humans who lived there long before, as they would use them as facehugger breeders. They would allow the Xenomorphs to be breeded by these humans so that they could fight the Xenomorphs. And if they weren't able to kill the Xenomorphs at this temple, they would just use one of their, self-destruct explosives to destroy the entire area, killing themselves and the Xenomorphs. And so they haven't been able to do this in quite some time, and so to get humans to this temple, they actually set off these heat signatures. They activated the temple so that somebody on Earth, in this case the Weyland Company, would discover that there is some sort of heat signature, that humans would be there, and now they'd have an ability to have the facehuggers jump onto these humans and have them, breed out some Xenomorphs so that the Predators could kill them. It's a trap! Of course, once we get there, once humans have been bred, once Xenomorphs have started to come to life, the Predators are on the hunt to start and kill all of the Xenomorphs. And amidst all this, there are some humans with guns who find themselves getting taken out by not only the Xenomorphs, but also the Predators. And there's 3 Predators in this film, and I gotta say, they are jacked. I mean, we have seen some really big, jacked, bulky characters. I mean, there's not a single one of these Predators that does not look absolutely jacked. But either the guys that they got in the suits for this film or the suits themselves had these guys looking incredibly bulky. And at times it comes off a little bit goofy. I think at times you can tell there was almost limitation in their movements because of how big they are. But I can't lie, it's pretty cool to see 3 really jacked fucking Predators in this film. And when it comes down to the human characters in this film, I find like the only one that you ever really find yourself invested in is the character of Alexa Woods, played by Sanaa Lathan. She's the one that, is worried about everybody. She's the one that wants to protect everybody. She's the one that the movie puts you through her eyes, She's the character that you're rooting for the most, that you want to see get out of it. There are a couple other characters that make you sympathize for, but the film never does in abundance with any of the characters in this film, but it's not really about them. I would make the point that this film is very similar to something like Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, where sure, there's human characters in the mix and the human narrative is just whatever, but you came for the monsters fighting and you came for the story that surrounds that. And I think that those films pay off when it comes down to that base premise. And I think similarly, Alien vs. Predator here doesn't necessarily have the greatest groundbreaking narrative when it comes down to all the human characters that are involved, but when it comes down to paying off as an Alien vs. Predator film, I think it does just that and has tons of fun fan servicey moments that definitely keep you engaged. Outside of the character of Alexa Woods, the only other character that I ever found myself really interested in as the movie was playing out, of course, is Charles Weyland, as he is a big figure in the overall mythology and lore of the Weyland Company. Of course, he's the one running it at this time, who's similar to his son, Peter Weyland, much later on, is also very, very sick. And so he's a character you can get behind, especially being able to see Lance Henriksen in this franchise again, I think is really cool. But the thing we want to talk about the most in this film are the aliens and are the Predators, the Xenomorphs taking on the Predators. And man, when I gotta say, this movie really pays off when it comes down to that. There are some great action sequences in this film, but one thing that's really funny to me is that the first time that we get to see some of the Predators go off against the Xenomorphs, one Xenomorph takes out 2 Predators really fast, and it immediately leaves us with just 1 Predator for the rest of the film, which I do think is a bit of a bummer and makes some of the Predators look like weak characters, to say the least. I think the film on an overall, though, is very entertaining when it comes down to the action, and similar to other films in the franchise, utilizes fantastic practical effects. And I think that's without a doubt one of my favorite things about watching all of these films, because even the weakest installments in this franchise have consistently utilized fantastic practical effects and puppetry, costume design, animatronics, and different things like that to make these creatures feel alive, to make them feel like real monsters that these actors are acting off of and being attacked by. And I think for the most part, when it comes down to all the practical elements of this film, it's really where this film shines. There's a great use of practical effects, not only when it comes down to the monsters, but also in the set design and the costumes for our human characters, the locations used, the face huggers. There is so much done to make this film feel tangible and real, like the locations that they're at are real. And I think I really have just grown to appreciate that more and more and more as I went through this entire franchise, even with the weakest installments. Now, like I mentioned, the human element of this film is not the greatest. So I will be honest in saying that from a critical standpoint, I do think that there's way too many characters here that are just meant to be characters that are either bred by facehuggers to give us some xenomorphs or just there to kind of have kills. You know, there is that element of this feeling like a slasher in moments, just so we can get to see the Predator and the Xenomorph take out a bunch of human characters, or for them to be kind of caught in a bunch of crazy antics between the two monsters. And I think that that's where this film definitely kind of has some of its funniest and fun moments, where you don't really care about the human characters all that much, but being able to have them at the center of these fights between two of the most iconic monsters of all times, without a doubt, definitely puts a smile on your face. And so we've talked about the human characters, the fact that the narrative isn't as strong, but this movie is about the monsters and those elements, and I think that that's where this film really shines. And so there's definitely some key moments I want to mention before we wrap this up. One of the big things that is in this film is the queen, the Xenomorph queen, who we learned was actually on ice within this temple and was actually brought up and reanimated by the Predators when they were kind of turning this temple back on, simply so that they can have her start to kind of spawn some eggs, have some facehuggers start to reappear. Later on in the film, though, as things are starting to kind of boil over, some of the other Xenomorphs decide to actually start attacking her so that her acid can actually unchain her, and then she ends up breaking loose. But before we get into that, as the film starts to progress and most of the human characters are being killed, most of the Predators have all been killed. There's only the one left who's taken out Xenomorphs left and right. There's some great moments of action with the Predators and the aliens in this film. There's an iconic shot early on with one of the Predators looking dead into the face of a Xenomorph who's just pierced him through the back with their tail. Some really cool moments between the two monsters. I won't lie, anything with those monsters in this film I think is top tier fan service. There are some great moments between the monsters, but the last Predator that is alive ends up deciding to team up with essentially the last human that is alive, which is the character of Alexa Woods. He ends up actually helping her create a spear and a shield using the body parts of one of the Xenomorphs that they just killed. And the two of them work together to try to destroy the Xenomorphs and get out of the temple, most notably because at a certain point the Predator recognizes that they're not going to survive this if they just try to take on these Xenomorphs face to face. So he decides to set off one of his self-destruct bombs, and as that timer is going off, the two of them are escaping. But while this is all happening, this is when the Xenomorphs are unleashing the Queen Xenomorph, who ends up breaking loose, making her way through the temple, and ends up coming to the surface right behind the Predator and Alexa Woods. And now the Predator and Alexa Woods must work together to take out the Xenomorph Queen. And so a big showdown happens, and this is probably the scene that's the most CGI heavy. There are sequences in the film that do utilize CGI when it comes to the Xenomorphs, but for the most part it's pretty minimal, and I think the film actually does a great job of having really consistent visuals throughout. The Xenomorph Queen, though she is very noticeably CGI, looks pretty good, and I think that this was in that time where we were able to get some pretty solid CGI in films. We live in a time now where it's like some CGI is so noticeable, even though we also can get movies that look absolutely phenomenal nowadays. But this was in a time where, you know, I think they did a really great job of blending dark sequences with some CGI where they can maybe mask where it isn't perfect, but made it look really good. And I think that the sequence at the end of this film between the Predator and the Xenomorph Queen and Alexa Wood all kind of going head to head, I think is a lot of fun. There's kind of a Jurassic Park element to the film, and this all ends with them eventually taking down the Xenomorph Queen. They're able to kind of drag her down into the frozen depths of the ocean, down over there in the tundra, essentially, where they are, where this temple is. And I should have mentioned earlier that the temple was underground, under ice. And yeah, this unfortunately also leads to the death of the Predator in this situation, who was working alongside Alexa Woods. But earlier in the film, I should also mention that he actually got impregnated, and they kind of make you forget about it because the facehugger jumps on him pretty quickly. But the predators that are watching over this situation and watching what the other predators were doing show up, similar to in Predator 2, where they are watching Danny Glover's character take out that predator, and they kind of like leave him with a, you know, bit of a respect kind of thing. They show up. They leave Alexa Wood. They give her a spear and say, hey, you know, you fought alongside one of our men. You survived. We're not going to kill you. Go on. You are a warrior. You're a champion of the situation. And I kind of think that's such a cool part of the Predator lore. So they end up giving her a spear. They end up taking the dead body of the Predator that, you know, fought at the end with Alexa Wood. They get back on their spacecraft and take off, only for the camera to pan in on the stomach of the dead Predator. And here comes out a chest burster that is half Predator, half Xenomorph. One of the greatest teases of all time for an ending of a film to set up a sequel, and it would be a fucking shame if the next movie absolutely squandered that potential. I guess we'll have to talk about that in the next one when we talk about Alien vs. Predator Requiem, which is without a doubt the worst of all of the films in the Alien and Predator franchise. But I look forward to talking about that with you guys very soon. But for now, let me know down below. Are you a fan of Alien vs. Predator? Do you agree with me that the human narrative isn't all that great, but that the monster action and the overall just fun of the film makes up for where this film lacks narratively? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below. I look forward to hearing the kind of history that this film has with various people. Did you see this movie when it came out, when it was really like hyped up? Did you watch it years later? Is this movie that you've never seen before? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.